Has Iger built a company that can't function without him, or is he just convinced everyone that that's the case?
I mean, we don't know because he hasn't really left, is
Right.
the fact. I mean, there is some fear within the Disney board that may be the case, and that's why they keep wanting him not to leave.
Right. G'day, I'm Lachlan Cartwright. Welcome back to the Breaker Pod. We are at Planet Hollywood in Midtown Manhattan, where every table is a front row seat to entertainment. Cheers to Robert Earl, the CEO of Planet Hollywood, for inviting us down. If you would like your venue featured on the Breaker Pod, get in touch. Breaker at breakermedia.com. And it is fitting we're at Planet Hollywood this week, as our guest is someone who covers the Hollywood moguls like no other. CNBC's media and sports reporter Alex Sherman authors the CNBC Sports Newsletter. He hosts the CNBC Sports Podcast. That's when he's not breaking stories about the industry. He's reported on every twist and turn of the long corporate soap operas at companies such as Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery, from Iger's Encore to Paramount making a play for WBD. Alex, thank you for joining us on the Breaker Pod.
I'm happy to be at Planet Hollywood with you.
I'm happy that you're here because you broke a cracking yarn yesterday about Disney looking for co-CEOs. Obviously, there has been so much chatter about who is going to replace Bob Iger that Disney said that there would be a decision by the first half of 2026, and we're kind of really nearing in on that. And this would just see Josh D'Amaro and Dana Walden share duties. Why has it taken so long to find a successor for Bob Iger?
Look, I think Disney's in no hurry to replace him. That will be the number one thing I would say. I mean, Bob Iger has pushed back his retirement five different times.
Wow.
5 times. And of course, he did once retire. And then he came back a year later, or even less than a year later, I suppose, if you count the time he left the board to the time he came back in 2022. So I really do think that's the major reason that this has taken so long is I think Disney realizes at some point this guy has to leave, but nobody wants him to leave.
Does he want to leave?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if you, if you've talked to him or listened to what he said the first time around, he said, yes, I was 100% on board with retiring. Like, I wanted to move on to the next stage of my life, and that, the board asked him to come back, and out of sort of duty to the company, he said yes. And I also think that beyond just the duty to the company, he felt bad that the guy that he basically handpicked, Bob Chapek, to be the CEO didn't work out. And so he wanted to come back this time around and fix it and do succession right and work with the board to do succession right. The interesting thing about this, I think, though, is that there really is no obvious, clear, shining candidate for the job.
Right.
And so that was
it's kind of been talked about that it's down to internally 4 people,
which Disney has been public about, right? That's Dana Walden and Alan Bergman, who co-chair the entertainment division. Alan Bergman in charge of the movies and films, Dana Walden in charge of TV.
Right.
Josh D'Amaro, who's in charge of the parks, which was Bob Chapek's job before he was CEO, and then Jimmy Pitaro is part of ESPN.
Right.
But drilling down a little bit, this has been the case for more than a year. The 2 candidates that kind of everyone talks about as the real 2 potential candidates are Dana Walden and Josh D'Amaro. And so what I reported yesterday was that there was this phone call between Bob Iger and Ted Sarandos, Netflix co-CEO, where Iger was interested to know, how does Netflix do this? So it is at least an indication that Bob Iger and the board are thinking about this idea of co-CEOs, and sort of the logical 2 co-CEOs would be Dana and Josh, because they come from different areas of expertise. Dana could be the Hollywood creative person, which Bob Chapek was not, and that was a big problem for him, that he didn't have any of these relationships. And then Josh D'Amaro would be the parks person, which arguably is the most important part of Disney moving
it's a cash
forward.
cow.
So in theory, it makes sense to elevate those 2 people. They would their areas of expertise and passion complement each other, and that could be the solution. Okay, there's nobody that replaces Bob Iger, but maybe these 2 people could do a approximate facsimile of what he's learned over his many years now of being CEO. He's been CEO of Disney since 2005, and there's for even longer. He was COO for 5 years before he was CEO. The problem with this is that Disney is just coming off this major power struggle between Chapek and Iger when you had kind of two people that were roughly
pitted
in charge.
against each other.
And so would this company really go to this co-CEO model after they just experienced the downside of kind of having two people in charge at the same time? And you could mitigate that maybe by elevating Bob Iger to executive chairman, which is what Netflix did, which is, I think, in part why that structure has worked out so well, where Reed Hastings went from CEO to executive chairman. It's also what Spotify is now doing. They just announced co-CEO. It's what Oracle has done with Larry Ellison moving on.
Comcast
will probably do this. I think, Brian Roberts' eventual move will be executive chairman, where Mike Cavanaugh is the CEO. Again, the problem with that with Bob Iger is that if you move him to executive chairman, everyone is still going to assume he's the CEO. And so you again run into the problem here of this power sharing dynamic, I think. And so while what the story says is, like, Disney's going to have to make a choice, because that co-CEO structure kind of makes sense, but it would kind of go against the history and political nature of the company. So I think that's what the decision the board's wrestling
Does
with.
it count against Josh the what happened with Chapek, that he came out of the parks and this didn't work? Is that something that is on the mind of the board?
I mean, I'm sure it is a thing, but I would say that's probably a minor factor, really. Bob Chapek, his issues, I think, were unrelated to the fact that he ran the park. So while superficially maybe it's like, oh, they're picking another parks guy, well, the last parks guy didn't work out very well, I think it had more to do with that dynamic between Chapek and Iger on a personal level, rather than the fact that he ran the parks division.
Has Iger built a company that can't function without him, or is he just convinced everyone that that's the case?
I mean, we don't know, because he hasn't really left is the fact. I mean, but yeah, like the small period of time that he wasn't there, it didn't function very well. Look, I think the fact of the matter is that there is some fear within the Disney board that may be the case, and that's why they keep wanting him not to leave. Bob Iger is the architect of the modern Disney company through a series of acquisitions. I mean, he was the guy in charge when they did Pixar, when they acquired Marvel, when they acquired Lucasfilm, when they acquired Fox. So he built this thing. And when you build the thing, when you're the guy that's in charge of building it, you're going to have an expertise level and sort of a comfort with all of these different businesses that if you just plop in a new person, they're obviously not going to have. The flip side to that argument is that when Bob Iger became CEO, he didn't have familiarity with all sides of the business. Again, he did to some degree because they groomed him for a certain amount of years, but his background was a guy that came from ABC. And so there were many critics at the time that were like, this guy can't run this giant parks division. He has no experience with it. And ultimately, you need to take a leap of faith on someone to be like, well, we think that person can, over time, learn the business. So if you do go the co-CEO model, you, I guess, can kind of circumvent that by saying, well, we picked somebody that already is in charge of the parks business, and therefore, even if this company can't be run by one person, maybe it could be run by two. Otherwise, you do have to take a leap of faith on someone and just say, we feel like they can grow into the job over time.
Do you see that there's a possibility they could punt again? And they say they come to us early next year and say, surprise, we've decided that
they could. They absolutely could. I will say that they've been so demonstrative publicly this time by saying that.
They look a bit silly.
If they punted again, I think it would almost have to be done in a way where at least the successor was named.
Right.
And then they would be like, okay, look, Bob will stick around for a little while.
A little bit,
but at least we're saying this is going to be the person or persons that are taking over.
There is a graveyard of successors, though. We touched on Chapek, there's Staggs, Meyer, Weiss. Is that bad judgment, or is it just this job is impossible?
Well, I mean, I think Chapek was probably bad judgment in essence. I think the other ones were a combination of the board not wanting Bob Iger to go and maybe Bob Iger not wanting to go. And look, each one of those has their own stories. Like Peter Rice came from Fox. There were definitely concerns internally with him
which is a total different culture. Working for the
that he didn't have the right Disney culture. But this again kind of speaks to this idea to some degree of why the Netflix model of co-CEOs have worked. Both Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos and Reed Hastings, they all grew up through Netflix. They were all very familiar with the Netflix culture. when your company is built by this series of acquisitions, you don't have that same inbred culture of being at the company for 25 years.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you get into a situation where you start to think like, well, does this person have the right value system for what we want as a CEO? Bob Chapek had many years of it. So I think the thinking was this guy had it. This guy was born and raised Disney. There were other problems there. But obviously, Dana Walden comes from Fox. So if she becomes the ultimate CEO, there are things there that the Disney board is going to have to be like, maybe this isn't a big enough issue to prevent the person from having the job.
We're talking about people that are on the inside. Has there been anyone on the outside with a real shot this time around?
If there is, we don't know about it. So there may be, but it has been a very well-kept secret. I have not heard anyone's name externally that I think, like, I have been told, like, oh, you really should look out for this person. They're a real front runner. I haven't heard that.
Do you think the Kimmel fiasco has hurt Iger's legacy?
No, I don't. I think it's a blip in time from a obvious sort of concoction of political events that happened to bubble up. I think had that gone in a different direction, then maybe. But I actually think Disney was...
They course corrected quick enough,
fairly deft with the course correction there. So I don't think it will be something that it comes back to...
What do you think his legacy will be? The bloke who saved Disney?
I think his legacy will be this guy was thought to be the gold standard of media CEOs for about 20 years. And
pretty good legacy.
And he really struggled with succession. And he had a lot of problems leaving the job. I think that will be ultimately his legacy. But as the CEO, even though if you take a look at Disney stock and you look at Netflix stock, Disney has grossly underperformed Netflix now for many years. I think people will give him credit for the first, 18 years there where he was a good steward of Disney.
Another mogul you've extensively reported on is David Zaslav, someone who's known for cutting, merging, cancelling, and now David Ellison is lurking. What's Zaz's end game, and what do you make of the Ellison Skydance tap dance here?
So I think Zaz's desired end game has always been to auction/sell Warner Brothers Discovery to the highest bidder, and he thinks that highest bidder very well might be a big tech company. That has been his hope. Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, whoever may come in the future. If not that, then you could merge with Comcast or Paramount. The issue now is you've got Paramount on the verge of trying to make a bid to buy the whole thing. We already know that they submitted one bid that was rejected as too low.
And they almost did the bidding process, in the press, right? They sort of front-leaked this, I think, to the
Which
Journal.
Is not an unusual
tactic, right?
When you're doing something like that and it's a hostile situation. Right. And so now David Zaslav, I think, is going to, and the board, it's not just David Zaslav, they're going to have to make a decision, which is, do we fight off Paramount to give ourselves some chance,
time, a runway, so the tech
selling to one of these tech companies that he believes would be a possible buyer there? And by the way, any tech company is not going to want the legacy cable assets.
For sure. They're dying, and as we know.
So what they would want would be HBO in the studio.
Right.
But that's the thinking of splitting the company, which is what their stated strategy is. They want to split Warner Brothers Discovery, pushing HBO in the studio to one side and pushing all of the cable networks to the other side and making two separate companies there. And again, the thinking behind that is that if you do that, you can then potentially sell HBO and the studio to a collection of buyers, start a bidding war there.
Right.
And maybe that would be the way to maximize value.
Increase value, right.
So the thinking from Zaz and the board's part would be, in order to circumvent that process, to front run it, you would need such a big bid from Paramount that it would make sense to not go down that road. That's their desired thinking. Now, what we don't know is, will that bidding war of these tech companies actually ever happen? That may just be wishful thinking.
Right.
I don't know that there's any evidence
that
Apple or Amazon
I was going to say,
or anyone else
for these assets? Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Netflix, look at Apple, have they ever done any acquisition?
Right. They build it themselves.
No, never.
Right.
So I do think it's a bit of a leap of faith to think that all of these companies, Apple did take a look at HBO. But the largest acquisition in the history of Apple, I believe, is still the $3 billion acquisition of Beats that was done. And this is a $1 trillion company. Like, they just don't do big deals. So I think it very much is a question on his end, or it may just be a negotiating tactic to say, look, we think there are all these bidders out there. They may not be. The bidders that make more sense from a history standpoint would be Paramount and Comcast, who have done...
Ellison and Roberts.
I mean, Roberts bought NBC Universal, a large media company, and has done a number of different bolt-ons, Sky, DreamWorks, et cetera, since then. And then you just saw a deal from Paramount where it's Skydance and Paramount coming together. And it makes sense that the Ellison family would have much larger aspirations than just Paramount. Now, the question I think for Comcast is that Comcast is now spinning out Versant, all of its cable networks. Versant, right.
Some would
it's
say.
not Versant, which includes CNBC. And so would Comcast really want to buy Warner Brothers Discovery when they're literally in the process of shipping off some of its cable networks? That mess is where we rest right now.
The WBD's debt, though, still seems pretty brutal. They've been kind of pushing forward this, we've turned a corner narrative. Is that to be believed?
Well, I mean, they have turned a corner in the sense that they are starting to pay down the debt. But to your point, they still have, what is it, $30 billion of debt on them? I mean, that's a lot of debt.
Not as much as Breaker Media's debt, but we're getting there.
Sure,
we're
exactly.
earning that down.
Well, you guys,
subscriber by subscriber.
You guys have turned the corner also. Now you're paying down the debt. Look, that's one of the reasons, actually, why Comcast's spin of Versant may make sense for Versant, because it will have such little debt that they're doing it in a different way than the stated split of Warner Brothers Discovery, where a lot of that debt will go with the legacy cable networks. In the Comcast situation, the debt is staying with Comcast and NBC Universal. That gives Versant, I think, a better shot to succeed than the Discovery Networks group, if it is in fact split, because they're going to have to keep paying down debt, and it's going to weigh down on their growth prospects. Anyone that buys this, to your point, buys the whole company, will have to take on the debt. It certainly helps when the main buyer is like the second wealthiest man in the world.
That helps a little bit. Those chips do.
But that guy didn't get to be the second wealthiest man in the world by just burning money.
Right.
So, I think it's a real factor, and it ultimately it may doom this deal. We'll see.
Is there a scenario here then that Ellison would own both CBS News and CNN?
Yeah. There is a scenario of that, for sure. That is not necessarily of conflict of interest. There are, NBC Universal owns NBC News and MSNBC.
Sure.
It would be sort of the equivalent of that. You own a cable news network and you own a broadcast news network.
Right.
So I don't think there's any regulatory bells that go off in my mind about that.
CNN has been a bit of a sort of a management carousel, between, we've got Mark Thompson now, we had Chris Licht. Do you think Zaz knows what he wants there? Do you think that they are executing their strategy well? This push into digital?
God, that is such a good question. Do I think he knows what he wants? I think he knows what he would like, and I don't think he knows how to get there. That is the evidence in front of me, I would say. There's, and I think if he took some truth serum, that's probably what he would say. I think the ideal here is CNN.com has a very large audience, and somehow you are able to monetize that audience in a different way than just having that website be a free website that is largely ad supported, which was a strategy that maybe worked 10 years ago and does not work today. And so he brought in Mark Thompson to try to come up with some way of making that site a subscription site, which they are in the very early innings of trying to do, to take advantage of that huge user base, with the thinking that some percentage of that user base will stick around and pay for our product. The problem is the thinking of the people that worked at CNN for many years. The reason they had not
commodity news is hard to monetize, right?
In fact, came to the conclusion that they could not monetize it because it was commodity news, because their business model was different from the New York Times, which had always been a subscription business, just a dying print one rather than a digital
And people
one.
are used to going and buying a newspaper and paying,
And
$5 on a
you
Sunday,
can make
whatever
the
it is.
argument that CNN was also a subscription business on cable TV.
But they just didn't realize they were paying for it.
Well, so A, they didn't realize they were paying for it. It was part of this larger bundle. They were not paying just for CNN like you would pay just for the New York Times. And B, the digital product was a different thing than the TV product. And in fact, they never allowed people to just watch CNN for free on the digital product. So again, that's why they haven't gone subscription before. And I think it's a leap of faith where frankly, evidence suggests that the deck is stacked against them, that they will be able to turn that business into some sort of juggernaut subscription business. And now they're thinking through, well, maybe we have to go niche, right? That's what we've seen from the entire industry in general. Maybe we can make this thing a bunch of niche subscription businesses.
Weather, health, you know, like little kind of
You have to kind of pick
standalones.
your superpowers there and say, there's an audience for this, there's an audience for this, because as to your lead-in, you can't really monetize commodity news in a subscription format.
Ellison is moving very quickly since the Skydance deal was inked.
Seems like it, yes.
Yeah, the UFC deal.
Barry Weiss.
The Free Press installing Barry
South
Weiss.
Park.
Correct. What do you reckon his next moves are?
Well, obviously, the big next move would be Warner Brothers Discovery. So I would imagine that will take up the bulk of his attention. Like it's either going to be this thing, or he's going to have to come to the conclusion that this is not the thing, and then it will be some sort of other series of acquisitions. That whatever that other thing is, I don't really know. I do know that it can't really be other sports media rights acquisitions, which is what UFC was, because they're kind of all locked up for years, right? Which was part of the impetus about why many people feel like he overpaid for UFC. Well, that was kind of the last major one
that was
for
up,
him. Right. So if he wanted the whole thing, I think he kind of needed to overpay for it, which he did. So I don't think it'll be sports rights. I'm sure they will try to re-up the NFL if the NFL moves the rights negotiations up, as Roger Goodell told me a couple weeks ago they wanted to do. So that may be one thing he does. If the NFL allows them to do it, they can extend that contract where there's a out clause at the end of the 2029-30 season right now. If they can get NFL for even longer, there's no doubt in my mind that they will do that. They're going to want the NFL for as long as humanly possible.
As anyone would.
As anybody would.
It's a gangbusters.
And Roger Goodell came right out and told me, like, he loves the idea of a Paramount-Warner merger because it just makes Paramount that much bigger and able to take on a longer contract where they can afford to pay billions of dollars for this thing, for however long that contract goes.
So speaking of overpaying for things, the memos were due yesterday at CBS News that Barry Weiss wanted everyone to, I think, justify their jobs.
Elon Musk.
The Doge memos. I've been speaking to multiple people in the building, some who did do the memos, some who didn't. What do you think was driving that acquisition in terms of paying $150 million for a Substack?
You could certainly make the argument that it was just a very expensive acqui-hire.
Yeah.
Right? And that it's, look, the Free Press does have a functioning business. They have, I think it was 170,000 subscribers.
I think it was reported around 15 million of rev.
Right, 15 million of rev a year, exactly. So not a huge business compared to CBS. So really, you're paying for Barry Weiss. And you're probably paying for Barry Weiss for the optics of paying for Barry Weiss. Like, you've already seen Donald Trump publicly commend the new leadership of CBS News. If CBS is going to then turn around and try to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, it probably behooves them to make sure that CBS News is not the thing that blocks that deal or whatever other deal you want to. So you've got to think that in David Ellison's mind, it's worth X amount of money.
It's good for business.
It's good for
You've
business.
got an ombudsman in who is a Trump acolyte. You've appeased the president, and maybe if you have any, I don't know, regulatory issues you want to get through, this might help sort of grease the wheels.
We do know that Barry Weiss and David Ellison are like-minded on certain things that are pro-Israel. Exactly. So they may come from a similar political background. But I have to think that the main reason that he did this was because it's good for business. The political optics around it are very good for the moment we are living in right now. We know we're going to have at least 3 more years of a Trump administration. We know that Paramount is going to be very aggressive doing something over the next 3 months, given everyone that I have spoken to in the David Ellison orbit all agree that he wants to be aggressive and he wants to grow this business quickly.
It did look like tech money rescuing legacy media. Is this a model for the future? Are we going to see more of this, do you think?
I mean, it has been the model to some degree now for a little while if you're willing to extend what the definition of that means. In other words, Mark Benioff bought Time Magazine.
Sure.
Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post.
Right.
So this idea of like wealthy tech dude buys legacy media company has been around for a little while. I can't imagine that will stop. I mean, that like Elon Musk bought Twitter. It's right. So there are going to be other wealthy people that are going to want to buy media businesses. That has been the case for more than 100 years in this company. I can't imagine that goes away in the next 10 years, even if these businesses, legacy media businesses, continue to degrade.
Well, if there's any tech bros that you come across that want to buy a 8-month-old startup, then you know where to...
With $30 billion of debt on it.
I'll take it. Yeah. You know where to find me. So you're part of the spin-off with Versant. I know it's still... Versant, I'm sorry. Yeah. Versant. I just love saying Versant.
I know.
Versant.
You and many others.
I know it's in its early stages, but what's your view from CNBC, from your vantage point?
I think it's exciting for CNBC because CNBC has been a part of NBC Universal, which has been a part of Comcast for many years since the founding. It's been a part of NBC Universal, and then since Comcast bought NBC Universal, which was 2011 and 13. You have to check me on the dates. It was a 2-part deal. Maybe it was 2009 and 2011. Anyways, when you're taking this entity that has long been a profitable entity, but suddenly the profits of that company will now almost by default be reinvested into CNBC because you now have to have a growth narrative with this asset for investors. That's exciting as an employee of CNBC. For many years, the profits that were being generated from CNBC were not reinvested in CNBC necessarily because NBC Universal was growing a streaming service in Peacock that cost a lot of money.
And they had the parks.
They were building theme parks, right. Those entities will no longer be a part of Versant. So the money, again, almost definitionally, has to go back into CNBC. That's exciting as a CNBC employee because it means we're going to be on the verge of some new opportunities that we've never been a part of before. I don't know what those opportunities are yet.
Okay.
But
do you see someone like Mark Lazarus going shopping and starting to acquire?
I think he
assets?
said that publicly. I think there's no doubt that.
And what does he buy? What do you think he would look to buy?
I mean, I don't know exactly here, but what he will look to buy, I think, are non-legacy media assets because the stated strategy is, we have like 80% revenue today, give or take, in traditional TV media and 20% of the revenue in digital assets. And Lazarus wants to make that closer to 50-50. So this idea that he's going to go out and start to do some sort of like cable network roll-up with Versant, that doesn't meet that stated strategy. Like you are going to need to buy some stuff that is not a legacy cable network to get the cable revenue overall down and the digital revenue overall up, whatever digital revenue means. Like, I don't know exactly what that means, but I do think what I do know is that it will support one of the existing businesses, meaning it will support finance, it will support news, it will support sports, or it will support general entertainment. Those are sort of the 4 tentpoles of the current company. So what could that be? It could be some sort of fintech company or a predictions market type company. It could be like something like Golf Now, which currently exists in Versant, which is this tea time company, which apparently is very profitable, that supports the existing golf business. It could be podcasts for the news. I mean, if you want to sell Breaker already, like you should have a conversation.
Well, I think you should. Lazarus and I should sit down. You do this must-read list every year of anonymous predictions by media executives. It comes out around the holidays. It's a lot of fun to read. What are your predictions for M&A that we could see, deals that we could see in the new year, in 2026?
I mean, you're asking me. I'm the rock. You should have asked me this 3 months from now after I talked to all these people, and then I would have something to say. I honestly don't know on that front. But what I can do is I can give you some companies that I think will do some sort of transaction. I have no idea who the buyer and seller would be, but like, I would imagine Lionsgate and Starz are two obvious candidates to have deals. They are now two separately traded companies. The point of doing that separation was to do some sort of deal. I would imagine that Warner Brothers Discovery will be a part of some sort of deal, either selling the whole thing or in fact auctioning off that studio and streaming side of the company. And once you go down that road, then the legacy cable part of the company almost definitionally becomes for sale too, because I don't think that thing can survive on its own. And I will say for Versant too, this company that will be spun off whenever we're spun off, January, whatever that is, there's no doubt in my mind that 2 years from now, this company's going to look different than what it's going to look January 1st. Like it was not spun off to exist as a standalone company with a bunch of legacy cable networks that have declining revenue. That makes no sense as a standalone publicly traded company. And certainly the leadership of this company and Discovery Global, if that ever trades publicly, they know that they're non-starters as publicly traded companies. They need to transform their businesses to give investors a growth narrative.
Cheers, Alex. Thank you for coming on the pod, mate.
Oh, that was easy.
And have you got any plugs for this week?
Yes, I do. I have a plug. Starting Saturday, October 25th, there will be 6 new episodes of the CNBC Sport On the Record show that airs on CNBC. You can watch it if you are a cable subscriber. You can also watch it if you are a subscriber of CNBC Plus, the CNBC streaming service. Each episode has 3 interviews in it. We already did a season 1. This is season 2. So that's a total of 18 new interviews that I have conducted with several colleagues of mine over the past few months with all people in the world of sports business.
Looking forward to watching it. And you can watch this pod on YouTube, where you should like and subscribe it. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we'll be back next week. Cheers.